Carl Johnson comes home to bury his mother, and the block he's grieving on turns out to be dying too. 5 years in Liberty City didn't protect Grove Street, it just meant he wasn't there to watch it rot from the inside. The people hugging him tightest at that funeral are not all, mourning the same loss he is. CJ. The funeral hasn't even started, and CJ Johnson is already the most hated man on his own block. 5 years away in Liberty City, and the neighborhood decided that was long enough to call him a traitor. He didn't come back for money, turf, or revenge. He came back because his mother died and somebody had to stand at that grave. That's it. That's the whole entry point into one of the most brutal stories Rockstar ever told. Carl Johnson is the protagonist of San Andreas, the guy carrying the weight of every one of the game's roughly 100 story missions on his back. He steps off the plane at Los Santos International straight into a police shakedown, and within minutes it's obvious the city he left is not the city he's walking back into. Grove Street is thinner. The gang is weaker. The respect his family used to command has been bleeding out for half a decade while he was 3 states away pretending none of it mattered. He's got a sister in Kendall and a brother in Brian, whose death is the reason CJ left for Liberty City in the first place. That loss is already sitting in the family before the funeral even starts. Rebuilding what's left of the name isn't a side quest, it's the entire reason he's still in Los Santos 5 minutes after the funeral instead of catching the next flight out. Whether CJ is a man getting dragged back into a life he actually escaped, or a man who is always going to choose this the second his boots hit the pavement, the game never fully picks a side. That's exactly why he plays as sympathetic instead of pathetic. He's not chasing an empire. He's trying to hold on to the one thing that made him feel like he belonged somewhere, and that alone makes him more human than most protagonists Rockstar ever built. But CJ isn't the one who kept Grove Street standing while he was gone for 5 years, and the man who did has his own idea of what loyalty is supposed to cost. Sweet Johnson. Sweet Johnson never left Grove Street, and he wants everyone to know exactly what that cost him. While CJ was gone for 5 years, Sweet stayed behind and lived every single day of it. He held the corner, he ran the colors, he buried friends, one after another, and watched the neighborhood shrink block by block while nobody showed up to help him hold the line. That's not backstory sitting quietly in the background, forgotten the second the game starts. That's the entire chip on his shoulder, and it explains every single interaction he has with his little brother for the rest of the game. CJ comes home wanting one thing, his family back. Sweet turns that want into a test. Prove you still bleed green. Prove 5 years in Liberty City didn't soften you. Prove you're not one of the guys who bailed the second things got hard, because as far as Sweet's concerned, that's exactly what CJ did the day he left. The two brothers clash constantly, and it's never really about the mission sitting in front of them. It's about what loyalty is supposed to look like when the whole block is falling apart around you. Sweet wants drive-bys, territory tags, and old rules followed to the letter, no exceptions, no excuses. CJ wants his mom's killer, his family's future, and honestly, a way out that doesn't involve dying on Grove Street for a gang that's already losing ground. Sweet sees that hesitation as betrayal before the betrayal even has a chance to happen. That's the trap. Sweet is so busy measuring CJ's loyalty against some old school code that he never once turns that same scrutiny on the guy standing next to him every single day. He's the neighborhood's self-appointed judge, and judges don't investigate themselves. They just point. Fans still argue about whether Sweet is the reason Grove Street survives as long as it does, or the reason it can't adapt fast enough to survive at all. Both readings hold up, and neither one lets him off the hook. His refusal to bend is exactly what keeps CJ chained to a block that's already being sold out from underneath both of them, piece by piece, deal by deal, while Sweet keeps insisting the old rules still work. The problem with demanding loyalty from everyone on the block is that it's easy to point the finger outward and never once check the guy standing right next to you, laughing the loudest. Ryder. Ryder is the funniest guy in Los Santos, and that is exactly the problem. He rolls up fast-talking, wisecracking, always got a scheme, always got a joke, and CJ falls right back into rhythm with him like the 5 years away never happened. That is the trick. Ryder feels like home. He feels like the easiest friendship in the entire game, the one that costs nothing and asks nothing back. Except it does ask something back. It just does not send the bill yet. Ryder shows up in the opening Los Santos stretch, one of the first faces from the old circle CJ reconnects with after burying his mother. He is loud. He is reckless. He talks a mile a minute about money and respect and getting his. And he drags CJ into some of the messiest, most chaotic gang business in the entire early game. Drive-bys, robberies, jobs that go sideways because Ryder cannot sit still long enough to plan them properly. He is not careful. He is not disciplined. He is a live wire wearing a durag, and everybody around him treats that like charm instead of what it actually is. A warning. Players have gone back through his dialogue for years picking apart every line, and the pattern holds up. He talks about loyalty constantly. He rarely shows it. He is the guy hyping up the block, hyping up the crew, hyping up Grove Street forever, while quietly being the least reliable person standing on that block. Nothing in his early scenes confirms outright where that instability is heading, but the writing plants it early and lets it sit there, unresolved, ticking. Sweet built the entire neighborhood on one rule: family over everything, loyalty over money, the block over yourself. Ryder is the first person who nods along to that rule while clearly living by a different one. He is likable, he is hilarious, he is also the first crack in the idea that everyone standing in that circle actually has CJ's back. That is the part fans keep circling back to. Not whether Ryder is funny, because he obviously is, but whether the game was using the comedy to hide something colder underneath it the entire time. CJ came home looking for a family that still made sense. Ryder was supposed to be proof that it did. But if the loud, erratic one was the obvious risk, nobody was watching the friend everyone loved most, the one whose betrayal would become the single most quoted moment in the entire series. Big Smoke. He asked for the biggest order in the history of a fast food restaurant, and somehow that is still one of the least suspicious things about him. Big Smoke shows up loud, hungry, and funny, the guy who turns a food run into a bit and a drive-by into a laugh line. He is not the muscle of Grove Street, and he is not the brains either, at least not on the surface. What he is, more than anything else, is the warmth. He is the guy whose energy makes the block feel like a family, again, right when CJ needs that feeling the most, right when everything else in his life is falling apart. That is exactly the problem. Every early scene with Smoke is doing double duty. It is building a friendship the player actually feels, and at the same time, it is quietly building the alibi for the worst thing that happens to Grove Street. He jokes with CJ, rides with CJ, bleeds a little for CJ. The crack that Ryder put in the foundation gets papered right over by how much fun it is to be around Smoke, scene after scene, joke after joke. That is the design, and it is a smart one. A crack you can see coming is a threat. A crack wearing a smile is a collapse waiting for the right moment to happen. The moment comes at the cul-de-sac, when the deal goes wrong and Smoke walks away from CJ, Sweet, and Ryder without a scratch, without a word of explanation, and without ever looking back. No rival gang did that. No outsider had the access to set it up that clean. It took someone who had already been inside the house, inside the plan, inside the truss, long enough to know exactly where to stand when the bullets started flying. Fans still meme the big orders and the size 60 jacket, and honestly, that is fair. The character earns every bit of it. But the reason the betrayal still lands as one of the most talked about moments in the entire series is that the show never let you see it coming because the show was too busy making you love him first. The comedy was not a break from the tragedy. The comedy was the tragedy, disguised, fed to you one funny scene at a time until it was too late to notice. CJ came home to bury his mother and rebuild something worth calling a family, and the man laughing loudest at his jokes was already deciding the price of selling that family out. Ryder was a crack in the wall. Smoke was the wall coming down, and the most disturbing part is not that a friend sold out the block. It is who he sold it to, because the people pulling his strings were not rival gangsters at all. They were wearing badges. Officer Frank Tenpenny. The most dangerous man in Los Santos has never thrown a punch. He does not need to. He carries a badge, and in this game, a badge beats a gun every single time, no exceptions. Every gangster in San Andreas answers to someone eventually. Rivals answer to their sets answer to territory answers to whoever can hold it. Tenpenny answers to nobody. That is the sharpened edge here. Rival crews fight over turf block by block, but Tenpenny owns the entire board from the start, and he never has to step outside a squad car to do it. On paper, he is exactly what the uniform promises. A veteran officer of the Los Santos Police Department cleaning up gang violence, protecting the city from the very people CJ grew up alongside. That is the pitch. That is the badge talking, loud and proud and completely fake. The reality is a man who plants evidence, frames innocent people, and forces CJ into doing his dirty work under threat of prison from the moment they meet. He does not ask for loyalty, he manufactures it one piece of leverage at a time, using arrests he can make disappear and charges he can make stick like glue. He smiles while he does it. That is the part that gets under people's skin. He is charming in a way that makes the corruption feel almost reasonable right up until it is not, and by then it is far too late to walk away clean. This is a man who came home to bury his mother and hold his block together, not only to find the person controlling his freedom was never a rival gang member at all. It was a cop with a badge and a grudge, deciding who eats and who goes to prison like it was nothing personal. That is a different kind of threat than anything on the street because the street plays by rules. Unwritten ones, sure, but rules. And Tenpenny simply ignores every last one of them. Grove Street's collapse gets blamed on gang war, on betrayal, on greed. but somebody had to hand outsiders the keys, and somebody had to make CJ's own circle desperate enough to turn on each other. A man with the power to erase a criminal record or bury someone under one is exactly the kind of leverage that makes ordinary people do extraordinary damage to the people closest to them. Fans still argue about whether any gangster in this game even comes close to him. And honestly, the case is not hard to make. Every major villain in San Andreas has a weakness somewhere in the design. Tenpenny's weakness is that he has none, not within the rules of the world he operates in. He is judge, jury, and evidence locker all at once. That is not a street-level threat. That is a system with a badge and a bad attitude, and it explains exactly why loyalty inside Grove Street was never as solid as it looked from the outside, but no man at the top does the dirty work alone, and the proof that this rot runs deeper than one bad cop is the man standing beside him. The one whose cruelty is so blunt and so personal, it somehow makes his boss look almost polite by comparison. Officer Eddie Pulaski. Tenpenny gets the reputation. Pulaski gets the dirty work, and somehow that makes him worse. He doesn't bother with the charm. Tenpenny smiles while he ruins your life, plays the whole thing like a game he already won, savoring every second of it. Pulaski doesn't smile. He just leans on you, calls you what he wants to call you, and makes it clear he doesn't need a reason to do it. That's not a lesser villain riding shotgun. That's the same rot wearing a plainer, blunter face. The uncomfortable part isn't that a second cop turns out to be dirty, it's what a second dirty cop actually proves about the department underneath him. One corrupt officer at the top could still be an aberration, a bad apple, a story CJ could survive by simply outlasting the man. Two officers running the same shakedown, backing the same lies, protecting the same operation, means the department isn't hiding a problem in one office, it is the problem, and it's wearing badges, plural. CJ comes home trying to bury his mother and hold his block together, and instead he finds out the people meant to police that block are already carving it up between themselves. Pulaski doesn't need charisma to matter here. He doesn't need a single clever line. He's proof that the machine has backup waiting whenever the first machine gets tired. That's the part that lands hardest. Tenpenny you could almost imagine negotiating with, given how much he enjoys the performance of power. Pulaski isn't performing anything at all. He's just there, blunt and hostile, doing the job like cruelty is simply what the job requires of him. Somehow that's scarier than a mastermind. A mastermind can be beaten, a culture can't. So CJ isn't fighting one dirty officer with an ego he can exploit. He's boxed in by an institution that trains its people to be replaceable, interchangeable, equally willing to ruin a man's life without blinking twice. Every threat gets a little less personal and a lot more permanent once you realize the badge was never the problem. The system underneath it was. But not every threat to CJ wears a badge or grew up on his block. Some of the most explosive danger in his life comes from a stranger he never should have trusted. Someone who turns simple affection into something that can get a man killed. Catalina. She screams that she loves you and pulls a gun in the same breath, and somehow that is the most honest relationship CJ has in the entire game. That sounds like a joke. It is not. Everyone else in CJ's life smiles first and stabs later. Catalina skips the smiling. She shows up early, pulling CJ out of Los Santos and into a string of jobs across the countryside. Robberies, heists, small-town chaos, and every single one of them doubles as a date. That is the entire relationship. Adrenaline standing in for affection, gunfire standing in for conversation. One minute she is grabbing him, kissing him, calling him her man. The next she is furious he moved too slow on a job, screaming insults, threatening to leave him in a ditch. Exactly zero warning between the two states. Compare that to the badge that smiled at CJ while planning his funeral, or the friends back on the block who hugged him at the same barbecue where they were already counting the days until Grove Street fell. Catalina never bothers with the hug. She is unstable in broad daylight, no mask required, and somehow that makes her less dangerous than the ones wearing one, because at least you know when to duck. That is what makes her so rewatchable. Players have documented the whiplash for years, the same handful of missions replayed just to catch how fast her tone flips from tender to homicidal. Some treat it as straight comedy, an over-the-top parody of toxic romance turned up past 11. Others read tragedy underneath it, a woman running on nothing but rage and adrenaline because nobody ever gave her a reason to slow down. The truth is probably both, and the game never picks a side, which is exactly why the debate never dies. Then, there is the detail that keeps fans talking outside the game entirely. Catalina does not stay contained to San Andreas. She resurfaces in the timeline of the series, one of the few characters from CJ's story who does, tying his loudest, most chaotic relationship directly into the wider GTA universe. CJ came home looking for people he could count on, and the one person who never bothered pretending turned out to be the closest thing he had to predictable. A man searching for family found more honesty in a woman who might shoot him than in half the people who shared his last name. But right as the world seems to prove that everyone close to CJ is a liability, a genuine outsider steps in, someone with no blood ties and no reason to stay loyal, who becomes exactly that: Caesar v. Al Pando. The one man who owes Carl Johnson absolutely nothing turns out to be the only one who never screws him over. Think about that for a second. 6 sections of blood relatives and childhood friends taking money to smile in CJ's face while planning his downfall, and the exception is a guy from a rival lowrider crew who only knows CJ because he's sleeping with his sister. Cesar Villalpando should be the least trustworthy person in the entire story. Every incentive points the other way. Instead, he's the most reliable one in it. He runs with the Farios Los Aztecas, a Chicano gang with its own turf and its own beef with the Grove Street on paper. He's elbow deep in the lowrider scene, the car culture that gives San Andreas half its identity: hydraulics, paint jobs, street races for pink slips, and pride. On the surface, Caesar is exactly the kind of guy CJ's crew would have written off as an enemy on principle. Different colors, different block, different family. Nothing about his background suggests he owes CJ a single ounce of loyalty. Instead, he starts feeding CJ information. Real intelligence, the kind that actually helps CJ survive the early chaos of coming home to a burning neighborhood and a dead mother. Cesar didn't have to do any of that. Nobody was holding a gun to his head. He does it because Kendall matters to him, and by extension, her family matters to him. That's it, that's the whole motive. Compare that to the men who grew up eating dinner at the Johnson table. They had every reason to stay loyal and found reasons not to. Caesar had every reason to stay out of it and leaned in anyway. That's the inversion the whole game keeps building toward without ever saying it out loud. The closer someone is to CJ by blood or by history, the more likely they are to eventually cash him in. Caesar never asks for anything back. He's not working an angle. He's not laundering some long con. He's not waiting for the moment it's profitable to flip. He shows up, he talks straight, and he keeps showing up. Dependable, unbothered, zero drama, no betrayal arc, no secret ledger, no plot twist waiting in Act 3. The lowrider outsider ends up being the most stable relationship CJ has in the entire game, and he does it without a single one of the family ties everyone else leaned on and broke. And if a stranger can outlove the people CJ grew up with, then the last piece of the story is a man who wasn't even from Los Santos, whose calm loyalty finally answers the question of who was ever really on CJ's side: Woozie. A blind man runs one of the calmest, most competent criminal operations in the entire state, and he never once asks CJ to prove himself. That is the detail that should stop you. Every single person from Grove Street needed CJ to bleed for them before they trusted him. A man from San Fierro, no blood relation, no shared childhood, no history at all, just hands him respect and backs it with action. Woozie runs with the triads out of San Fierro, a city CJ has zero roots in and zero reason to expect help from. He is a crime boss, technically. But he does not posture, does not test, does not manufacture drama to prove he is in charge. He is strategic where a Big Smoke was greedy, calm where Tenpenny was volatile, direct where Caesar was conditional. He shows up, he does the job, and he keeps showing up, mission after mission, city after city, as the story pulls CJ out of Los Santos and into the rest of San Andreas entirely. That expansion matters. The game stops being a Grove Street story right around the time Woozie becomes central to it, and that is not an accident of geography. It is the thesis walking on screen. Fans have called Woozie one of the best supporting characters Rockstar ever wrote, and some point to him as proof San Andreas has the deepest cast in the series. The pattern backs it up completely. Ryder sold CJ out from inside his own house, Smoke ran the empire that buried Sweet's block in dope, Tenpenny owned CJ like property with a badge for cover. Caesar loved Kendall and still needed convincing before he'd fully commit. Every one of them started close and ended up costing CJ something. Woozie started as a stranger and never once asked for anything CJ couldn't give freely. That is not a coincidence, not after everything else in this story. It is the rule the whole game was built on. Closeness bred betrayal, distance bred loyalty. The people who grew up on Grove Street, who ate at CJ's mother's table, who called themselves family, they were the ones plotting its collapse the entire time CJ was gone and long after he came back. Grove Street was not taken by rival gangs or crooked cops or bad luck. It was handed over, piece by piece, by the friends who smiled the widest while they did it. The only people who never sold Carl Johnson out were the ones who had no reason to owe him anything at all. He came home to save his family. Turns out the family had already sold the deed. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.